All right, let's get started. So tonight, slight change of pace from the first two talks that we had before the break, and I'll be talking to you about how decisions and the decision-making process that we as humans use affects the products that we build, and how we can leverage our awareness of how we make decisions to create products that people will love more and download more and make you guys tons more money. Now, before I start, who are the developers in the room? Show of hands. Is there a designer in the house? Oh, okay. Okay, so very developer heavy, but there's a few designers. Excellent. Let's get started. Oh, and both. There's a category called both. Awesome. All the titles. As I was putting together my presentation, I couldn't decide which fonts to use, so I gave them all to you. Every single one is here. And I thought, you know what, you guys can decide which one you like best. No need for me to make that decision for you. So let's get started. And now, oh, Brett. This was Brett yesterday, now it's me today. Right. So as I was putting together the presentation, I use Keynote. You know, I don't love it or hate it or anything, but like every product that you've ever used, which gives you fonts in a nice list, Keynote gives me 400 fonts in a beautiful alphabetical list, which I then spend hours and hours and hours deliberating over which is the perfect font for me to use in this presentation to wow you all tonight, right? And from an engineering perspective, it makes perfect sense, right? There's a bunch of fonts out there. In fact, thousands and thousands and thousands of fonts out there in the font universe, and lots of people who are working on making new fonts every day for us. And the obvious thing to do when you put that into a product like Keynote is to list the fonts alphabetically. Right? I mean, that's the way Word does it. That's the way every product we've ever used does it. Right? There isn't a product which makes my life easy as a person making presentations by grouping the fonts in a digestible manner, which I could immediately just snap into and use, right? Now, having the fonts arranged in a way like this would actually make my job much easier. I'd be like, technology hipster pack, I've got it covered, my job is done, right? So looking at some of the reasons why products don't look like this, when really they should, because they would make our lives easier, is really what this talk is about. And I'll look at that in 3 sections. I'm going to try and stand on this side now and hope the clicker still works. So we'll look at the talk in 3 sections, and it's really 3 sort of layers of how we make decisions. The first one is about how reducing choice and making decisions in life at the individual level, how we process all of that and how that works. The second section will talk about how when we as individuals come to work as designers and developers, and sometimes both, how we bring those things with us and the different dynamics that exist between technology people and design people and the conflicts that often ensue and how they are stemmed and rooted in our decision-making process. And the last section will look at how all of that comes together and manifests in products that we make, right? So let's get started. Reducing choice. So a little bit about me. I work at eFox, as Padma said, which is a web editing company. We've been around for 15 years and the development team is based in Brisbane. We also acquired TinyMCE about 3 or 4 years ago, and TinyMCE, I think some people are familiar with that. It's a web-based text editor used by 500 million people every single day. So that's a gigantic user base. It's an open source product. And part of my challenge here with the team is both to bring design elements to it so it's not so engineering focused as it has been for the last 10 years, and also to figure out ways, pathways to monetizing what is an open source product. So it's very much kind of a bland product in the spectrum of different things that exist out there. But that's where I'm at right now. Some stats. TinyMCE is 250,000 lines of JavaScript code. So for the developers in the room, it's one of the biggest JavaScript applications, I think, in the world. And I'll tell you some more stats as we go through the presentation. So I joined eFox about 1.5 years ago, and I am the first time that eFox has had design in the house. It's been exclusively an engineering-led product and organization. And so some of the stories which I'll talk about tonight will illustrate where that conflict between the two cultures comes to light. Now, my own background's in computer science. I started out in IT, so I did used to write code a very long time ago, and then I sort of transitioned into UX and design. Enough about eFox, let's talk about me, right? So I get up at 4:44 every day, which is rather crazy, but the symmetry of that number appeals to me. And I kind of decide, do I hit snooze? Most of the time the answer is yes, so it rolls around to 4:53, and I kind of go through the same process again. Do I get out of bed or do I hit snooze? Probably hit snooze again, and so on and so on. And by the time 7:37 rolls around in the morning, I have made probably like 35 or 40 decisions already, right? And it's only 7:37. And on average, in a country like Australia, we make 35,000 decisions every single day, right? That's a pretty big number, right? And that is all good. And when you're a person developing an app and you kind of are faced with, should I give my user a choice of A, B, or C, you know, blue, red, or green, whatever the case may be, 3 or 4 decisions, it doesn't seem like a big deal because it's only 3 or 4 decisions. But what you've got to remember is that person uses that app in the context of their very, very busy life. So your 3 or 4 decisions taken in the context of 35,000 decisions made by a human every day quickly add up. And sometimes putting too many choices in front of a person is really the straw that broke the camel's back, and it results in people clicking the other download button. We'll get to that at the end. So you're probably thinking, hang on a minute, just back it up. You know, everything I've ever learned about life, ever, tells me that choice is good and freedom of choice is our right, and this is what we fight for and what we aspire to, right? I mean, this is kind of the way we've all been brought up in a country like Australia or America or in a Western nation. But what is really interesting is that this is actually one of the biggest dogmas of Western industrialized nations, and that is that notion that freedom of choice increases individual welfare and happiness, right? And if you watch Barry Schwartz's TED Talk, he does a fabulous job of explaining that. He's got a book called The Paradox of Choice. And so we see this freedom of choice exhibited in the products that we use every single day. Microsoft Word has 282 buttons. It has buttons that have buttons and buttons that have buttons that have buttons and buttons you've never seen, but they exist in this product. And it gives us tons and tons of choice. Never mind that we only click 3 or 4 or 5 of them, right? But this is a product which gives us all the choices we would ever want to have. And even our own product, TinyMCE, we have things called more drawers. So if you run out of space for your buttons, you can add a more drawer to add all your buttons into. And again, never mind that you use 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of them. This makes you feel good, you know? How many people here have ever taken features out of a product? Wow, really? You guys are advanced. I've got nothing I can teach you, nothing at all, right? So, but it's a very rare kind of thing. You know, most of the time we're on that treadmill chasing the next feature and the next feature, and you know, the next release has more features and so on. And it's really well exhibited in editing software, which just has tons and tons of features and is very feature-driven. So the reality of using something like a WYSIWYG editor is that we don't need all those different buttons. Right? We don't, but yet when we get into that feature-driven product development mindset, and certainly when the development is being done by an engineering team and that kind of mentality and thinking, it's adding features and adding features and adding features even though we don't need them. And along comes a product like Medium, right, which takes all the buttons away. And what happens? People go, ooh, they took our buttons away. They've really limited our choice. You know, so this is a product that took a team of about 15 designers 18 months to come up with, right? It seems really simplistic, but it's beautifully executed. It only gives me the things that I need. And very quickly people criticize that and say, oh, but hang on a second, it only works because it's a limited use case, right? So our relationship to decisions and taking options away from people and reducing choice. It's really deep and hairy. So here we are flying around the universe on our rock, waving our freedom of choice flag, feeling really, really good about ourselves, and totally delighting in the fact that we have not one, but 50 shades of grey available to us to use every single day. We have 178 flavours of mayonnaise, which will make any sandwich ever just perfect, exactly perfect for us. And at any point in time, we can unlock our phones and have 2 billion people available to us to go on a date with. And if that's not enough, while we're on that date, we have the freedom to choose someone else to be with right at that moment, right? And so all this choice and all this freedom is super good. And yet, when we look at Western industrialized nations, things like depression and anxiety and suicide and loneliness and all those kind of dark elements of life are on the rise and they're on the increase. So we have this paradox where we have all the freedoms in the world, but yet we're still kind of unhappy. And this was really brought home to me when I was on a holiday with my kids in Sri Lanka at the beginning of the year. So we're driving around Sri Lanka in a little van, and you see like street side stalls which sell pineapples or mangoes or buffalo curd. This one sells buffalo curd. They don't sell pineapples or mangoes because they're in the north. And when you're in the south, you buy buffalo curd. And I turned to my driver and I said to him, "Gamanu, what is your favorite kind of food?" And he looked at me like loco, except in Sri Lankan. And he's like, my favorite food is wherever I am. And I'm like, no. Your favorite food, the one you would love to get out of bed for. What's your favorite food? He's like, it's wherever I am. And it wasn't that he didn't understand the question at all. It was that this notion that we would have all these different choices and have to choose favorites was just completely foreign to him. Yet for us, it's something which is part of everyday life. And to my estimation, people in Sri Lanka were quite happy. And they can only get buffalo curd in the south. So, I don't know. I don't know what conclusions to draw from that. So if choice is not freedom, and it gives us anxiety and decision fatigue and cognitive overload and all those different things, why is that? And again, that Barry Schwartz talk explains it beautifully. But in a nutshell, the reason why is because it had to be you, right? You're given all the different choices and you chose one and you're not happy with it. You've got no one to blame except yourself. It had to be you, right? So, for all the developers in the room, you're probably thinking, when is she going to get to the part where we talk about code? And I am now, right? So, next part. So the whole discussion about choice and how we make decisions and all of that, it's not really to tell you to remove choices that can be made. Even the 4 ingredients cookbook has 340 recipes, right? So it still gives you some choice. And even the simplicity of the interaction with this app, right? It still gives you access to 2 billion people. So it's not about removing choices that can be made, but it is very much about removing choices that have to be made at any particular point in time. And how do we do that? So we as individuals, we have this complicated relationship with choice and decision making and all of that, and we come to work and we're developers and we're designers, and there are 3 people who are both. And how does that play out when we are in teams and we work together? Now, eFox, where I am right now, for 15 years, they were very much engineering-based kind of company, and along comes design. Let's do things in a design thinking kind of way, and it's a real culture clash. And at the very core, one of the fundamental, I think, truths for engineers is that there is a very big drive to making things flexible and configurable and reusable, and people want to build platforms. They don't just want to build solutions and all of that. And so it's that idea of functionality, whereas design is a little bit of a different perspective. It's more about usability. And when you take those 2 very different perspectives and you put them together, that's when a lot of cultural differences kind of happen, and sometimes there are bumps in the road. So I'll talk about one way in which design systems... Oh, sorry, I'm not even there. This is the cultural clash, right? So this is the cultural clash, right? For most developers, when they are working with a designer, they see it as an infringement on their freedom. And they're like, don't tell me to limit choices and put a particular kind of button on a page. I want to give my user the flexibility to choose whatever they want. And in a product like TinyMCE, I mean, seriously, this is not even like an exaggeration, which I'm sometimes prone to. But when I came along, like TinyMCE as an SDK product, out of the box, it comes with no defaults. Every single item is configurable, but every single item must be configured, right? So you spend like days and days trying to add all those buttons in, and you're like, we know that people use these ones most frequently. Why don't we provide that as a default? And the founding engineers of that product are like religiously against that. They're like, we will not do that because we don't want to tell people what to do. So it's that cultural clash. So design systems are a great interface where designers and engineers kind of coming from their different perspectives meet in the middle. And this one is Gel Design System, which is Westpac's fabulous product. You know, I think they have a team of about 30 or 40 people that works on it. It's really beautifully articulated. Lots of other examples. Material design is another example. At the more coding sort of level, we've got atomic design. So all these different design systems are interfaces where, as designers who come to work and as engineers who come to work, we can kind of limit the choices that we make in writing the code, right? And that leads to good usability. So this is TinyMCE, the original skin builder, where you had the flexibility to set 133 different variables to style your TinyMCE to be exactly how you want it. And so you could style things like button split border and button padding and button primary BG highlight. Every single item was completely configurable. And as you can imagine, no one used this skin creator because it was just too hard. I mean, what developer is going to sit there for 57 days to try and figure out how to skin our product with 133 color variables? So one of the first thing I did was, I remember again, 250 million lines of code, 1,000, I don't know, I'm not that good with numbers, lots of lines of code. We have 606 selectors in the CSS and 133 hard-coded references to color in our product. 133, and we're a text editor. So, do we need 133 colors for bold, italic, and underline? I mean, something had to be wrong here, right? So, one of my first jobs here was to work with the team to make a better and more user-friendly themer and skin creator. And so we did that by converting those 133 references to colors into 10 color variables, right? And we did that not by looking at the code, which was impossible. It was just so incredibly complicated, we couldn't make heads of tails of it. So we sort of went top down. We took screenshots of every single screen in the product and we color picked the screens. And we went, okay, on this screen, these are the colors which you can see with your eye. Doesn't matter what's in the code. And we took all those color charts at the top, put them into a master color chart, and the solution was really obvious at that point, right? You look at all those colors and you go, those colors are all the same. Why do we have 5 different hard-coded references? So we collapsed them into variables, and that's how we got our 10. And that was really good because the color picker turned into something like this. So you only had to select 5 colors because the other 5 are inverse of the first 5. Right? So again, things like design systems where limiting choice at the code and at the coding level are a really good way for those really different viewpoints and those different appetites for how we make decisions and how we make things usable versus making things configurable can come together and play out in a really efficient way. So design saves development time by reducing decisions that have to be made while coding. So same kind of thing, just at a different sort of layer. Last part. Okay, so we have like individuals and how we make decisions and all of that, and we come to work and we work in our teams of developers and designers and sometimes both. And how does all of that play out in the products that we bring to market? So what can we learn from all of that, and how can we deliver products to people to make sure that the products are things that people will love? And in other words, hit our download button, not our competitors. So there are probably about 3 different things I'll go through. The first one is Be kind to your user. Make your product work straight out of the box, much like TinyMCE SDK does not. Right? We provide no defaults. It doesn't work out of the box. You have to configure everything. Right? So Kibana, which is a web front end to Elasticsearch, which is a super complicated product, but our services guys, they can set this up in an hour, and that's because it comes pre-packaged with things that make it really easy to use out of the box. Now, if you want to spend another 3 days setting up your own server, that's totally fine. You can do that, but right out of the box, you have access to the Elasticsearch front end, and it works for you seamlessly. And again, compare that to our original skin creator, which had 133 color variables that you could set. That is not working straight out of the box. That's like a nightmare. And part of this making things work out of the box is really to provide sensible defaults for people. So again, as engineers, when your focus is on making code reusable and making these platform-like structures which can be reused and so on, you don't want to provide defaults. I mean, it's both, it's that I don't want to tell someone what to be doing, but it's also I want to make the code as flexible as possible. So if you take nothing else away from tonight, it's don't do that. Provide sensible defaults right out of the box. And so before I came along to eFox, Jack, who's a really long-standing member of the team and wonderful guy, product manager there, he said, Anna, before you came along, we just used to config the shit out of everything. Like, we'd come up with these choices we had to make and we wouldn't know, so we'd be like, let the user configure it. Much like I did with the slide. So this green is hurting your eyes, right? But I thought, no problem, I'll just give you a color picker and you can configure it to the color of your choice. Yeah. So very much, by giving configuration options to our users, we're asking them to design the product. Like, we don't want to make those design decisions for you, user. You download my app and then you design the product yourself. And when I'm someone who makes 35,000 decisions every day, and you're giving me a product I have to design myself, I'm not happy with that. I'm clicking somewhere else. And rethink the design. So sometimes, even though you provide different defaults and so on, and you make things work right out of the box, it still might not be enough. Right? Every now and then, you might have to go back to first principles and actually fundamentally rethink the design of your product. And I'll give you an example of what we did with TinyMCE Cloud, which is a product that we launched last year. So, I've been very critical of SDK and how it's like, you've got to configure everything. But, to the team's credit, we have partially gone towards solving that problem by producing TinyMCE Cloud, which is a product that works, as the name suggests, in the cloud. And with this version of TinyMCE, we do provide defaults for things. So things are pre-configured to the most likely kind of scenarios. You don't have to do updates anymore. Everything gets auto-updated. We've taken a lot of the load of those kinds of things that the users were burdened with before, and we're doing it for them, right? And in the mobile version of TinyMCE Cloud, that's another example of where the team sat down and we completely redesigned the product. So when TinyMCE Cloud loads on a mobile phone, it's actually completely different. And here, after many, many agonizing hours of conversation, we've removed buttons. The mobile phone version only has about 7 buttons on it. That's it. So out of all the different more drawers and things that we had, and this was really like, I can kind of half joke about it now, but it was a really very, very hard thing for the engineers to do emotionally, to be like, okay, we're only putting 7 buttons in this product. We also reworked design elements like dialog boxes. Dialog boxes on a desktop make sense. On a mobile phone, they're rubbish. So we went back to really first principles and redesigned a lot of fundamental things about the way the product works on a mobile interface. It's not just responsive. So, final takeaway. Distill it, take it all in, and this is really it. Options gift your user with homework they didn't ask for. So be kind to your user. Don't give them extra decision points, which they need to struggle to fit into their busy days. Make those decisions for them and give them products which are ready to use out of the box and which take away some of the burden of those 35,000 decisions which we make every day, rather than add to them. And that's me in a nutshell. So.